Feels like the job market is more RNG than ever before. I found this article that discusses HackerRank's open-sourced ATS system. It's actually a link to the GitHub that they provide. And it got me thinking about how significant RNG is these days. So the article reads, HackerRank Open-Sourced its ATS. My resume scored 90 out of 100. Oh wait, 74 out of 100. So it clearly signifying that it is a very random process. Popped up on LinkedIn and Reddit with hundreds, sometimes thousands of likes. A coworker mentioned it to me in passing a few days ago. I decided to test it out. First working run, 90 out of 100. Felt pretty good. Now before I go into it, I want to take a look at this GitHub. You can see, it's got over 3,000 stars. Pretty simple ATS system. So it starts with PDF extraction, section parsing, GitHub enrichment. This one I question a little bit. Evaluation, and then it also has an output section. So let's get back to the article. So the first run was 90 out of 100, felt pretty good. I had some debug prints scattered around from troubleshooting the setup, and so I cleaned those up and ran it again. 74 out of 100. Same resume, same command. Only thing I changed was deleting print statements. To be honest, I don't know what he's getting at here. I don't know why anyone would think print statements has an impact. I guess his point is that he didn't change anything other than that, and he's still got a different output. But obviously we're seeing here, there's a bit of variability in the way it parses. So he went on to disable development mode and put it in a loop to run 100 times. So he ran it 100 times, and we can see here that the score varies quite heavily, going as low as 66 and as high as, looks like 99. Now I notice here he is using Gemma 3 4-bill. This is part of my skepticism with this article. Asking a 4-bill param model to do anything consistently. ATS systems have actually been around for quite a long time. However, it hasn't really been on our radar until really AI. Pre-AI ATS, and you have post-AI ATS. Pre-AI ATS was a glorified filing cabinet. Its main function was really to just organize resumes and provide a directory for the recruiters to keep themselves organized. Post-AI ATS is a whole different beast. They're also evaluating an ATS score. Now, as with anything AI related, there's always going to be some variability in the output. Even today, with the models that we have, you're going to get something varied. Let's use an example, right? Let's test this live. Let's ask it a simple question. Let's say we're going to try this prompt here, and it just says, hey, my name is Jordan. I'm an engineer and I enjoy coding. Please accept me into your company. So we're asking the LLM to rate this out of 100, 18 out of 100. Now, let's take the same prompt, and I'll do it in a temporary chat window, because then we have no concern of it feeding in from the prior output. Here we can see the effectiveness score ended up being 12 out of 100. You could see this live, right? You see there's never a guaranteed same output, same input, depending on the model. If I ask the same exact model again a third time, odds are, let's see here, we'll probably get a pretty similar score. 18 out of 100, okay. Pretty similar to one of the ones we got prior. The better the model, the more consistent you're gonna get with this. The critique I have of this article is that it's using a very small bill param model. This isn't really a fair comparison, and I really don't believe most people are using this small of a model. But it does beg the question, right? How much of the resume process is RNG in this day and age? Pre-AI, I felt like a lot of the RNG was based around just human luck, right? Time of day. If you posted your article maybe on a certain day or a certain time of day, the recruiter may just so happen to have stumbled upon it just in their regular processes. And so you can kind of consider that as an RNG thing, right? Mood of the recruiter at the time, you wouldn't think it matters, but it does. If I stumble upon your resume and I'm having a bad day, my odds of passing it on just went down. There's also what they're looking for. So many variables that go into this that's basically an RNG, but then you add on to it this ATS system. And even outside of ATS, right, in 2026, you're seeing way more applications. So back in pre-AI era, you might have had maybe 100 applications, giving you a 1% chance of being seen. Nowadays, you have 1,000 applications. There's no way they're going through 1,000 applications. So what's gonna happen is they're gonna take your resume, they're gonna send it through the ATS scoring system, and that's gonna file it to its importance level. So your odds are even less than 0.1%. It's even deeper than that, right? You might be at a 0.01% chance, right? Depending on how they configure the job role. And it does go both ways. There's a chance you have a higher chance, because if your resume actually fits the role, there's that possibility that you end up being pushed ahead. And that's why I always tell people, right, make sure when you're applying, you are kind of trying to apply to things that actually fit your skill set, because that does matter, especially with how the ATS systems are. Trust and believe they are setting these up to maximize the potential. Now let's get back to the rest of the article so we can continue. If your company's cutoff sits at 85, I fail 65% of the time. Same exact resume, different luck. Here is a quick rundown on how the tool works. Your PDF gets parsed into text. An LM is called 6 times to extract structured information, such as your basics, work history, education, skills, projects, awards. See, I'm a little bit skeptical about the awards part, and I'm also quite skeptical about the GitHub profile. Now this ATS system is specific to HackerRank. Maybe this is something that they value. But anyway, it pulls your GitHub profile, scans your top repos, appends them as an extra context, and then everything gets fed into an LM at once to be graded. So this even adds more ammunition as to why you would not use a fucking 4-bill per AM model for this. Scoring is out of 100 with up to 20 bonus points on top. 35 points for open source contributions. And so again, this is from the GitHub profile scan. 30 for personal projects, 25 for work experience, 10 for technical skills, and up to 20 bonus points for startup experience, a portfolio site, and a technical blog. Now, when I'm reading this, honestly, it's retarded. Absolutely, these make no sense. I find it hard to believe that HackerRank is actually using these, and so it's part of my skepticism towards this repo. It looks like it's a legit repo, and it comes direct from HackerRank as far as I can tell. But I am skeptical that they're actually using this internally. It's possible this was just a way to get SEO. Smart, right? We know damn well these companies are doing things to get attention, and this could be one of those things, because I find it hard to believe that they're going to prioritize things like open source contributions. I find it hard to believe that they would cut somebody off because of that. And so he says here, the default model is Gemma 3.4 bill, running at a temperature of 0.1, low, supposedly nudging the model toward deterministic outputs. So here's what I found when I looked at those individual categories. Looking at the technical skills, I scored an 8 out of 10 and 98 out of 100 runs. Nearly perfect consistency. How come? Because technical skills are a checklist. You either know React or you don't. There's nothing for an LM to judge. A 5-year-old can match that checklist. This is pretty reasonable, right? Going back to our tab here, if the ATS is scoring something specific like keywords, it's really a pass or fail. If an LM sees React on your resume, it doesn't have to judge or go through any kind of additional prompt, say, hey, what is this? Does this possibly mean something? However, the article doesn't mention this, but there is some aspect to how you're structuring the keywords, right? Let's say resume A lists directly React. And let's say resume B lists front-end frameworks. Resume B, despite possibly including the above, could be misconstrued. However, as a human being, if I saw somebody's resume and they said front-end frameworks, my assumption would be that they have experience in React and possibly Vite or some other front-end framework, and they didn't want to just specify one. A human being can, assess that, and they can parse through that. But an ATS system is looking specifically, possibly, for this keyword. That's why it's a good thing, in my opinion, always list out explicitly the frameworks that you're using and assume that they design their ATS to look for that specific keyword. Continuing the article. Now look at projects. There's a huge variation. LLMs struggle to make a judgment call like that consistently. Sometimes my projects lack architectural complexity. Sometimes they demonstrate real-world deployment. Which one the LLM spits it out is a roll of the dice. Temperature 0.1 is already low, but going even down to temperature 0 doesn't fix this. Somebody opened a GitHub issue back in October showing scores of 27, 34, 32, 34, very consecutive runs that are not the most consistent at a temperature 0. This non-determinism isn't a bug you can just fine-tune away. It's a fundamental design flaw. Agree. In fact, if I was designing a fair ATS system, I would never have the AI do any kind of guesswork here. But the AI's job would be to take from here, let's design a fair ATS system. A fair ATS system uses PDF extraction. This to me is the fair system. There's no AI in this loop. The fair system would be that the human takes a look at this output. There is no AI intervention and this in between. But unfortunately, you can't do that, right? As I mentioned before, 1,000 applications. There's no way you're going to get a human to read all 1,000 applications. You need a little bit of additional legwork from the AI. And so unfortunately, this fully fair ATS system doesn't exist. You have to add in some extra layers in there. So PDF extraction of text, the AI assessment to human. This is basically what you end up needing at the end of the day. Now, if a recruiter is actually taking their job seriously, I find it hard to believe that they would risk the AI completely taking control here. Because I don't know if you've ever looked at resumes. I've looked at resumes where it is the most bare thing ever. In fact, I would go as far as to say a common trend I've seen is the weaker engineers tend to have more impressive resumes. And the reason is because engineer A, the person that has a ton of experience, they don't need to prove themselves as much, right? You can view this as engineer B. It's like they have to go out of their way to make sure that everyone sees they're cool, they're relatable, they have skills. Engineer A doesn't give a damn, right? They let their experience speak for themselves. If a recruiter completely relies on an ATS system, it will always fail at this step. They're never going to get this engineer A because engineer B is the one that's optimizing for the ATS. However, it is not the case that engineer A is not getting jobs in this market. If you look at who's getting jobs in this market, it is engineer A. And so I don't believe the common ATS system is built like this. I really don't. It's possible there is some AI intervention into the scoring. Yes, of course. But the way they rank it is going to depend company to company. And I don't believe they're going to rank the AI assessment as highly as the hard skill. I was worried part of this might be the model. After all, Gemma 4, okay, so he does allude that Gemma 4 Bill is a local model running on his machine and it's a pretty small model. And so he went ahead and he tested it with a better model. Now he went and he tested it with Gemini 3.1 Flash, which honestly, that is not the model I would have picked for this, but go ahead. Gemini resulted in a tighter distribution, scores closer between 48 and 64, but if your cutoff is 60, you're still failing 28% of the time through no fault of your own. And so even with this better model, he still sees quite a bit of variation, and it is cutting them off randomly. The open source scores have become more consistent. That's a legit improvement, but project scores are still all over the place. Experience has me the most concerned. 25 out of 25 every single run. I went back and pulled up an old resume. One internship on it, also 25 out of 25. This is harping specifically on the HackerRank's ATS system. I really find it hard to believe HackerRank is using this internally, and I feel like this is low-key an SEO bait post from them, but we'll continue. And the clue is in the prompt. So here we have the prompt that's being used, and it says, analyze the work and volunteer section for real-world internship or production experience. Give extra points for founder roles, co-founder positions, or early-stage engineering roles, first 10 to 20 employees at startup. And so just looking at this, it's a pretty small prompt, and it's also not really giving much of a guidance in terms of what this part means, right? So it says to focus on real world internship or product production experience, but it doesn't really say how to weight the internship versus the others, right? It's just saying, hey, give more points to this, but it's not saying how to handle these ones. No rubric, no examples, no anchors for what earns a 15 versus a 25. Problem is, and I don't know if he's going to allude to this later, but even with this being achieved, it's still not going to be 100%. You could give an AI 1,000 parts of a grading rubric, and there's still a chance that there's going to be variation. So variation will always exist. Yes, you can help it for sure, but I venture to guess if you spent a ton of time doctoring up a rubric, it would still end up in this kind of a distribution. So he goes on to say, a junior engineer with one internship gets a 25 out of 25. A principal engineer with a decade of distributed system gets 25. Okay, we get the point. 25 out of 25 is pretty much a consistent regardless of your experience. Use an LLM to parse their resume into structured data. Great, that's what they're good at. That's what they're good at. Use one to check whether someone knows Python. Amazing. Use one to judge whether a candidate's experience is worth 18 or 24 points. You get a vibe check. Something HR teams, bar raisers, and a dozen other initiatives have spent decades trying to avoid. The 65% weighting on open source plus projects doesn't help either. I'd take the engineer with 30 years of experience who built S3 over someone with two internships in an open source project, but this tool wouldn't. This is part of why I really don't think anyone's using this type of an ATS system. Most ATS systems are more sophisticated than what we're seeing here in this post, but the point still stands, right? We are in an RNG era. Pre-AI, there was still some RNG involved, right? You had to worry about the time of the day, you had to worry about mood of the recruiter. Now you have to worry about an ATS system, and this one can change very much. And so while I don't believe HackerRank is actually using this tool that Mr. Dan Kinski is linking to, this does highlight a real reality of ATS systems. They're not consistent. And no matter what you do, they will never be consistent. You could argue that humans aren't ever consistent, right? Mentioning these factors here before, I would say probably there's more variability here than there was here. If you ask me today which one produced better results, the human that's looking at it versus the ATS system, I honestly believe the ATS system would produce more higher quality candidates on average because of how many times these factors come into play. But it can never be perfect, and it never will be perfect. And so our systems before were not perfect. Now they're even more perfect, in my opinion, but not quite perfect enough to where it's completely consistent. And so we'll go to the conclusion of the article. So he says, if you're an engineer with any say in how your company handles resume screening, please be very careful with AI screening tools. A tool that can't differentiate isn't filtering for quality, it's just filtering. You might as well throw out half of the resumes and tell the applicants you don't fuck with bad luck. And so I agree with the sentiment. When you have 1,000 applications, it's already unlikely you're going to see all of them. And so some form of filtering has to happen. You end up with a case where it's either the human filters based on their factors, again, time of the day. There might be a day where you're just having a terrible day and someone named Bill upset you, so you do not want to look at a resume named Bill. It might be the case that your mood is so bad that you're just hungry and you don't want to have to look at resumes, and so you're just skimming through them. And so while it's true, it feels like you're just throwing out resumes sometimes. That kind of was the case before. At least with the ATS system, you're getting a little bit more of a structured input-output. The examples he gave earlier, these are based on really shitty models and really shitty prompts. And I venture to guess that real ATS systems are doing a lot more to make sure that it produces a better output. The job market is an RNG freaking mosh pit, dude. You have less control over getting an interview than you realize. I could file the same resume 1,000 times to 1,000 different companies. Pre-AI, there was a higher chance that they were gonna see it. Post-AI, there's a lower chance they're gonna see it. However, you have to realize Nancy doesn't understand anything about the job, whereas Claude knows a whole host about the job. If I feed a job description to Claude, it's gonna have a better idea than freaking Nancy. That's just reality. Because the average hiring person does not know anything about the job role. They just know about keywords and they just know about what the job is asking for in the description. Whereas Claude knows more. Claude knows what goes into making a good engineer. It has a lot of examples of what a good engineer is. And it can take one simple keyword and understand a whole host a lot more than what Nancy would see with her eyeballs. This has not changed. While we are still in an RNG era, and I would argue it's even more RNG than ever before,